Next, I'd like to introduce you to our second keynote speaker. Similar to Ivan, he's a world-renowned cryptographer, professor, and entrepreneur. He's a professor at the Department of Computer Science at Bar Ilan University in Tel Aviv, Israel. He was the co-founder and CEO of Unbound Security, which was recently acquired by Coinbase, and he's currently working for Coinbase as a cryptographer. He's also widely regarded as one of the world's preeminent experts in the field of secure multi-party computation. He's written multiple foundational papers on MPC, and he's widely regarded for his work in bringing MPC to traditional enterprise markets, as well as digital asset markets and others. Please join me in welcoming Professor Yehuda Lindell as he walks us through the principal processes and attributes that allow achievement of advanced key security using MPC. Yehuda, welcome and thanks for sharing your time and your insights.
Thank you, Frank. Today I'm going to talk about achieving advanced security with MPC. And in particular, I'm going to focus on the notion of key misuse protection and how that relates to zero trust. So when I talk about key misuse protection, I'm really talking about how can you use a key without enabling others to misuse that key. And I'm going to talk about two topics. One is what we call key use without misuse, and the other, or preventing key misuse, and the other is zero trust. And as I'll show, these are actually very closely related. So when we talk about key misuse, or in general key protection, it's important to differentiate between two different levels. The legacy key protection always related to preventing a key from being stolen. So I have this cryptographic key, it might be used for signing, it might be used for encryption or decryption or whatever it is, and I want to prevent someone from stealing that key, because obviously if you steal a key, then you can do anything that the legitimate user could do, and that could of course be disastrous. So let's consider a case where you have a database of 10 million encrypted credit cards. The worst possible thing that could happen is that an attacker steals the entire database, encrypted, and steals a decryption key, and then at home they can just go and decrypt each row at a time, and then they now have 10 million decrypted or credit card numbers in the clear that they can use in every way they want to. A much better case would be if someone indeed got into the system and are attacking the system, but because they weren't able to steal the key, they would somehow have to interact with the system in order to decrypt one row at a time of this database. And since that's a very slow process and one that's a noisy process in the system, they're likely to be caught after not too long, and somehow they'll get away with 10,000 decrypted credit cards. And of course, there's a massive difference between 10,000 and 10 million. And also, in such a case, the organization who's the victim would even know which credit card numbers were decrypted, because it would all be audited, and would be able to provide protection to those credit card owners only, and not to the others. So that's really the justification why legacy key protection focused on preventing key theft. Because if you can't steal the key, the amount of damage that you can actually do by using the key maliciously is not too bad. Obviously we prefer not to steal anything, but in many cases it's not the end of the world. We can tolerate some fraudulent behavior. And but the question still begs, what happens in other cases if a key is misused? Is this always the case? Is preventing keys from being stolen always enough, or do we actually need to do a lot more? And let's look at two cases. The second one will be cryptocurrency, so I'm going to get there. But I actually want to start with another example because I think it's a very important one. We know that code signing is used to protect all software. So whenever you download software or an app to your phone, or a firmware update, or an operating system update, or any software whatsoever, it's digitally signed to ensure that it's actually legitimate, coming from a legitimate vendor, and it's not some sort of malicious program that's going to do damage. Now, Apple sometimes issues an OS update for your iPhone, and think about what would happen if malicious parties were able to get just one malicious signature on a phony iPhone update that was actually malicious. They could use that to just brick millions of phones. Any phone that downloaded it would just be locked, and you could never upgrade it because the software just wouldn't allow you to, or could turn them into a surveillance device that you don't know about. So opening your camera, opening your microphone, and you'd never even know that. That's really disastrous. Similarly, if you just get one malicious signature on a banking app that's actually out there to steal your money, then the attackers can do a lot, because everybody will download any phone receiving that banking app update will download it because it's actually signed and looks perfectly legit. If you get one SAML signature on admin credentials, and that's what's used to authenticate an admin inside a system, then the attacker would have access to the entire network. And of course, that would also be catastrophic. So in code signing, in contrast to what we saw in the previous slide about encrypting credit card numbers, just one malicious signature is enough to break an entire system. And the same thing is also true in the digital asset space, thinking about cryptocurrencies, NFTs, and more. In this case, again, one signature is enough to steal all of your money, because if you have all of that under one address and one key, then I just need to sign on one transaction transferring all of your money, and I've stolen everything you have. And in this space, there are keys that protect not just millions, but even billions of dollars. In the NFT space, it can be even worse, because you can't actually get it back. And it's not just worth money. In at least the idea of an NFT, it's something that has value beyond something financial. This could be like a family heirloom, but in the digital form of that. If someone breaks into my home and steals my silver candlesticks that belong to my grandmother, then yes, there is certainly a financial loss, but the loss is much greater because I can't ever replace that. And at least philosophically or conceptually, NFTs fall into that category. And obviously it will depend how that space develops, but this is an area where if someone steals your NFT, you can never actually get it back. Maybe someone can give you money back, but that's not the same thing. So when we think about, and going into more detail in the cryptocurrency space, we can see there are really three main elements that make key misuse so disastrous in this space. The first is that the key is actually the asset. So if I steal your credit card number, I haven't stolen your money. I need to now go ahead and use that credit card number. And there's a black market for credit card numbers, but there's a limit to what you can actually do with it. Whereas in this case, the key is actually the entire asset. And if you steal your key or misuse the key, then you can steal all of the assets. And that's exactly the second element. Just one usage of that key, fraudulent usage of the key, basically could mean a loss of absolutely everything that's protected by that key. So the key equals the asset, and you don't have to steal the key in order to steal the asset. You just have to misuse it once. And finally, and this is actually the most fundamental, the whole idea of a blockchain is that it's a decentralized system that's not reversible. So once a transaction is accepted on the blockchain, you can never take it away. So everybody might agree that someone's stolen all of this person's money, or someone stole billions of dollars even from an exchange, but there's no mechanism in place to undo that transaction. That's unlike the standard banking system. And that's actually by design, because as soon as you're able to do that, you can then censor operations, and you can decide who's allowed to and who's not allowed to. And the entire blockchain space is designed to not get into that corner. And therefore it's irreversible. You of course can, the community can get together and make decisions like that, but once they do, then it's always a slippery slope. So, that case was clear it was stolen, maybe this case it's less clear, and then you end up being a judge and essentially a government, and that's what you're not supposed to be. So when you think about it in this context, key misuse for cryptocurrency is actually the problem, and it's not one of key theft. There's no reason whatsoever for me to steal your key if I can misuse it once, because I'll get exactly the same effect. Now, the problem when we start trying to solve this key misuse issue is that there is this belief or notion that it's actually impossible to prevent. And the reason is that if you breach any machine that's allowed to carry out the operation, then you can misuse the key. Now, someone must be able to use the key, otherwise it's useless. And that means you just have to get to that someone, and then you can carry out the operation. So if you look in this diagram, we have this perfectly secure environment for key processing, let's pretend. This environment cannot be broken. You can never get a key out of it. And all it does is it gets a request to sign on something, and it will sign on that information and send it back. But it won't do, it will never let the key out, and no one can ever break into it. So, a client would in general send a request to the server. The server will do whatever it checks it wants to do. Is it a legitimate request from the client? And then we'll ask this perfect environment to carry out the operation. Now, all I need to do as an attacker is breach that server and ask for any operation that I want, and the perfect secure environment will carry it out for me. So just preventing the key from, just having this perfect environment will indeed prevent it from being stolen, but doesn't help you from misuse if someone can get into the server in the middle here. And although it's true that it's impossible to perfectly solve this problem, like everything in computer security, and also the same in physical security, there are no perfect solutions, but a lot can be done to mitigate the problem. And here is the approach that we propose, and that is of distributed policy enforcement. So the idea and the basis for this solution is to not allow any single machine the right to approve a cryptographic operation. So there is no single server that you can get into and corrupt and then issue requests to carry out operations. Rather, you have multiple machines that verify if a cryptographic operation should take place, and the operation will only take place if they all actually approve that this is a legitimate operation. And you can have many different policy checks before you allow an operation to take place. For example, you can check when the operation is requested and does it make sense. So should someone be asking for code signing at 2 a.m. on Friday night? It's unlikely. Maybe our development team is very committed, but it's unlikely they're that committed. Or does it make sense that the largest ever transferal of funds inside our exchange, maybe from a very large, heavily protected wallet to another one, would be happening at 4 a.m. on Sunday morning? It's very unlikely. And if such a request comes through, we may want to escalate and have additional verifications before we actually approve it. You can do rate limiting. So I know that normal business process, I have up to 1 million operations a day or something like that, or it could be 1,000 operations a minute or whatever it is. And I can limit that. I don't want to go far beyond that. So, if it gets beyond 1,500 operations a minute, then I'm going to cap it at that point and only process that many. And that way mitigate any additional fraudulent operations. I can have allow on block lists. So I can have a wallet where I'm only allowed to transfer to a predetermined list of addresses that I've authorized already, maybe people in my family or organizations that I know that I'm paying bills to or something like that. And likewise, I can have block lists saying that I refuse to transfer to any of those addresses. They can be specified addresses, they can be addresses from a certain location, or they can be addresses that are flagged by some external organization as problematic, and so on and so forth. I can have AML and fraud detection tests, and they can be verified before I carry out the operation itself. I can validate the consistency of the transaction with other systems in my organization. In particular, if someone is requesting to transfer funds, that request had to come in externally and is probably recorded in some other system. And I want to make sure that someone didn't get to this machine and carry out an operation that actually didn't come in via the regular system. And therefore, I can reach out in a different channel and verify that it actually already exists there. And I can even have human validation. So, if it's relatively infrequent or risky transactions like tens a day or something to that effect, then I can have human validation. This is actually what is done. And a human can look and verify, does this make sense? Or if it's above a certain amount, carry out whatever checks that person needs to do before approving the operation. And this can also use not just static policies, but dynamic, what we call dynamic data collectors. So for fraud, or I want to know what the price of the sell is, maybe someone is saying if Bitcoin goes above $50,000, then sell, but otherwise don't. How do I know when Bitcoin is over $50,000? I need to externally go and get that information. So you can have a number of data collectors that will get that information, sign on it, and I can check that there are a number of those that actually are approving. So we want to deploy this very powerful policy engine. And the question is, how do we do it cryptographically? So a first attempt at this would be as follows. Each of these policy validators would have a signing key. And in order to approve, the policy validator will sign on some approval statement together with the transaction information and send it to this single machine who'll carry the signature only when it receives enough signatures. Okay, so that could be a way to do this policy enforcement. And indeed, in order to convince the machine to sign, then you'd have to have all of these different policy approvals, and that can indeed be very meaningful. But the question is, again, where does the validation take place and can it be bypassed? So if the validation took place on this server in the middle, then I'm actually back to pretty much where I was in the previous slide. If an attacker gets to that machine, it's a regular machine, then they can request the operation and just bypass all of this policy enforcement we've been talking about. The other option is to put this policy engine inside the perfectly secure environment for key processing. There are two problems with that. One, there is no perfectly secure environment for key processing in the world. Nothing is perfectly secure. Nothing is unbreakable. And therefore, you just don't have that level of trust. And the second thing is that even things like HSMs that are aiming to achieve this, they're not perfect, but they're aiming to achieve this, they don't have such a policy engine inside, and making any changes to them is very, very difficult and slow. So it's not a very good solution for something like the cryptocurrency world, where you need a very dynamic environment that you can change and update very, very easily. So the second option is to use MPC. And what does MPC do? By definition, it actually fits very, very nicely, because the idea of MPC is you split a key into multiple shares amongst different parties, and you need all of them or a quorum of them to approve an operation in order to carry it out. So all of these policy approvers can now have shares of the key, and they can participate in the MPC operation only after they verify that the transaction should be approved according to what they're supposed to check. And if you don't have a quorum of approvers, you actually cannot sign because you don't have enough key material. This is something that you can't bypass, and that's why we call it cryptographic enforcement. It's not an access control type enforcement, but it's true cryptographic enforcement, because you can get to the server and say, I want to carry out this operation, but there just isn't enough key material. It's just random garbage. So as long as the signing scheme is secure, you just cannot bypass, and you can't do that. And that's why this is a very effective solution. Now, you can use multiple external approvers as well and data collectors, because you don't want to have any single point of failure. So you don't take one fraud detection or fraud analytics machine. You can take 3 and require 2 out of 3 of them to approve, and 1 out of 2 price collectors, and 3 out of 5 AML, and so on and so forth. And then you get a very, very rich quorum structure that provides very strong protection against any attempt to bypass. You would have to really breach many machines simultaneously in order to do that, and it's all cryptographically enforced. Another thing which is important is making sure that you can't just bypass the whole system by replacing the policy. I have a policy on the machine, maybe I can just replace it with a policy that says automatically sign without checking anything. So that can be achieved by, again, signing on all policies and using an admin quorum, possibly with MPC, to make sure that you would need a full quorum of administrators in order to replace any policy. And that quorum of administrators could be a very strict one, because this is, again, something that only happens rarely, and you can validate that it's truly should be happening and it is not a fraudulent transaction. So in this example, in this slide, you can think of, here's a vault, and I want to have 2 different policies or two different ways of working. One is an automatic day trading, and then this is on the left-hand side. So this policy, you would have 1 out of 2 AML machines and 1 out of 2 fraud management machines. And you'd also have a manual day trading policy that could be for different cases. And there you'll have 2 out of 2. You require both the AML machine and the fraud management machine, but you'll also require 2 out of 4 people to actually come along and sign this a transaction before it will be carried out. So you can build such a policy machine. It can be very easy to define. It can work via UI like this, or you can define things like firewall rules. The people in security are very familiar with this type of process, and so it's a very effective and powerful one in practice as well. And adding humans is a very important element. I think that when we're looking at risky transactions or very large transactions, there's nothing like a human to look at it. Of course, I know that humans have their drawbacks as well. They can suffer from social engineering and so on and so forth. That's why you don't only want to rely on humans, but having humans in the loop is a very important measure as well. And you want to enable that also in a useful way. I don't want to tell a human, okay, you get a phone call that we want to carry out a transaction, go into the office, go into the data center, turn on the machine and approve it. That's very painful. It's much easier for the human to pick up their phone, use their Touch ID or whatever it is to authenticate, review the transaction, and then just approve it. And what's important, again, it's cryptographic enforcement. There is part of the key used in the signing process on the phone. So you can't bypass this. And that's very important. And by the way, note that this is a very different system for the rest of the IT infrastructure. And when you want to deploy MPC, well, you want to have strong separation between those elements, and this actually gives you that. So you can approve quickly as a human, and it's very convenient. You can also have bots, which are automatic machines that are checking policies. They can respond very quickly, of course. And you can even have cold elements as part of the MPC process. And some of those elements can be completely disconnected if you want a cold wallet. But in contrast to regular cold wallets that simply have people walking into a room and they can do whatever they want, here, once again, that cold element can verify policy. And secondly, they're only one piece of the MPC process. So it's not like I can get into the vault, connect that cold element and do whatever I want. Here, you would still be very limited to what everybody else is checking, making it a much stronger solution than a standard cold element. So this is how we can achieve policy enforcement. And MPC is crucial for achieving it, because anything that's not MPC is not actually cryptographically enforced. You can think about these external policy checkers signing, using digital signatures to approve it and send it to another machine who will then carry out the operation. That looks like cryptographic enforcement because there's digital signing, which is cryptography, but it's not in the sense that we mean. It's cryptographic enforcement, but that can actually be bypassed. Because you get to that machine and then they have the entire key and they carry out the operation. In order to get true cryptographic enforcement, you have to use MPC. And therefore, we think that these are very, very aligned. The second topic that I want to talk about, and more briefly, is zero trust. And as a cryptographer, when I hear about zero trust, when I first heard about zero trust, it sounded to me to be very suspect, as if you can get security when you can't trust anything. You have zero trust in your system, and you can still get security, but that's obviously ridiculous. If you can't trust anything at all, and you have zero trust, then everything is going to be broken. But that's actually not what it means. And when I learned about this, I realized that this is a very important paradigm that we should be more familiar with, and we should actually talk in this language, because it's one that a lot of people are familiar with as well. So according to NIST special publication 800-207, and I recommend reading it. It's actually a very, very easy and informative read. They define it as follows: zero trust provides a collection of concepts and ideas designed to minimize uncertainty in enforcing accurate, least privilege per request access decisions in information systems and services in the face of a network viewed as compromised. So it's a bit of a mouthful, but what it says here is it's a collection of, let's call it solutions or methods that still achieve a level of security when the network is compromised. So we want to fail gracefully. We don't want to have this situation where once the network is compromised, everything completely fails, and zero trust is aimed at doing that. So why is zero trust important? We used to always think about perimeter protection. If I can protect my network, protect my perimeter so no one can get in, then everything inside my network is safe and I'm safe. So we can have strong physical perimeters, and we can also have strong digital or virtual perimeters, network perimeters with firewalls and anomaly detection, and all different things to prevent someone from getting inside. But none of these work in a perfect sense. And the only organizations that think that attackers are not inside the network are organizations that are either not looking or don't know how to look, because attackers are inside networks today. So what can we do in a world without a good, strong perimeter and one which is breachable? And that's what Zero Trust comes to address. We can't assume that attackers are going to be kept out, and we need defense in depth. So we can't afford to have a situation where we fully fail when an attacker breaches the network, and we have to have some graceful degradation that gives us guarantees of security even once we've been breached. So what are some examples of Zero Trust measures? For example, encrypting all the internal communication inside a single data center. If I have strong perimeter protection, I don't need to encrypt between two machines in the same data center because the perimeter is protected. But we're not assuming it's protected. And if we don't encrypt between machines inside the data center, then anyone who gets inside can actually eavesdrop on absolutely everything. We authenticate requests coming from clients inside the data center. I don't look at the IP address or look at the fact that they're physically connected to this internal network and say, okay, if you're physically connected to the network, I believe that you're honest. We can't assume that anymore because it could be an attacker inside. Access should be granted for a short time only and with least possible privileges, because you may have been honest when you got access, but afterwards not. And also, I'm not going to assume that because you managed to get access, you're necessarily honest. Maybe you managed to steal credentials. Anomaly detection should be ongoing because we need to always be alert. When is the suspicious behavior inside our networks? And we need to find that quickly and recover quickly from that. So that's the general notion of Zero Trust. And now I want to talk about cryptographic Zero Trust. But I want to start by talking about a massive failure of cryptographic Zero Trust. One very popular service is called Windows ADFS. ADFS means Active Directory Federation Services. This is a way to authenticate into a system. You authenticate to this ADFS server and you receive a signed SAML token to the network. This is basically a signed credential that says, I'm Yehuda, this is what I'm allowed to do. This is the dates or the time that this token expires. And whoever is presented this token by Yehuda, please let him in and let him do what he's allowed to according to what's written in that token. It works very well. It's very, very widely used in networks today. If you implement this ADFS on a regular machine, and in particular, if the key the cryptographic key that signs on those tokens is on a regular machine, and if someone breaches that machine, the result can actually be disastrous because now they have the key that enables to sign on any token that they want. And this actually happened with the SolarWinds supply chain attack. Attackers were able to get in, steal the key, and then issue tokens independent of Windows ADFS, and they looked fine. And attackers were able to get into, the U.S. Treasury Department and more by, they used the SolarWinds Orion software supply chain breach in order to get into the ADFS, steal the SAML signing key, and then it was all over. But again, this is not just a matter of stealing the key itself. Even key misuse here has to be taken into account, because if you can breach a machine who can request a SAML token as the administrator, then I can still get an administrator credential and do it whatever I want inside the network. So cryptographic Zero Trust means thinking about how I build my cryptographic infrastructure so that even if someone gets inside, it's not game over. And once again, I think MPC is extremely well aligned, and it's actually very much what we talked about earlier. In fact, the whole key misuse prevention together with policy enforcement is very much a Zero Trust paradigm, because we're talking about how do I get security and maintain security in the midst of an attack. And one obvious solution is dispersing assets and forcing an attacker to breach multiple different environments in order to carry out its attack. So if, for example, I have MPC parties for signing on this SAML token inside ADFS, instead of having the key on a single machine, what if I had MPC machines on AWS, Azure, and GCP? Maybe even running MPC inside AWS Nitro, which is a secure enclave, or in Azure in AMD Gen 3, which is also a secure enclave. They're not perfect, but combining 3 different environments with MPC and with inside a secure enclave would make it very, very difficult for the attacker to breach them all. And if all of these machines are also verifying policy before they sign on any SAML token, then this can really make it much harder for an attacker to do anything, even if they're inside the environment. So MPC is about distributing trust, forcing an adversary to break into multiple different machines in order to do anything. And that means that even if an adversary is inside your environment, they won't have the keys to the kingdom, and they still have to do much more to get anything. Likewise, exactly the same with crypto assets. Again, the theft is irreversible. The payoff is extremely beneficial, extremely high. So zero trust is actually a crucial paradigm when building any crypto asset protection system. This means that if you can steal one asset, you shouldn't enable to steal another asset. If you can misuse for small amounts, that shouldn't mean you can misuse for large amounts. You shouldn't think, oh, well, if I can use the key to steal $100, then I can use the key also to steal $1 billion. And again, using MPC, we can prevent that together with the policies. Maybe it's very easy to transfer $100, but much harder to transfer $1 million or $1 billion. And even if an attacker is able to completely take over an exchange or a custodian's network, they still should not be able to do anything. And that may seem quite anti-intuitive. If I've taken over your entire network, I have full control of everything. Of course, I can sign on anything that I want to. Well, it's actually not the case. If I have shares of keys inside other networks, like other clouds that are only used to for this specific purpose, and the credentials for those clouds do not exist anywhere in the regular network. Or if I'm using users mobile, so I have a mobile phone that has a key on it, a key share on it, and it's involved in the MPC, then that's a completely different IT infrastructure to my network. So again, using MPC, I can get to a situation where even if someone completely takes over my network, they still haven't gained the capability to steal all of the money being protected by that organization. MPC can also be used to flexibly adjust between security and speed by having instantiation of the system with many approvers, possibly with different types of elements, cold and human, so it would be slow but very, very secure. Another instantiation of the same system, but now with bots who are verifying policies automatically, simple and fast policies, so you can get speed and security just by instantiating the same system differently. And that's also very important for achieving scalability within an organization. So again, in summary, MPC is a crucial paradigm for achieving security in the cryptocurrency space by achieving a very strong level of zero trust security. And that's very closely connected to this notion of key misuse. So thank you very much for your time, and I'll hand it back to Frank.